Seattle-Tacoma International Airport buzzed with the energy of a Friday afternoon. Travelers wheeled suitcases across polished floors, announcements crackled over loudspeakers, and the aroma of fresh coffee wafted from kiosks. Amid the crowd stood 9-year-old Ethan Carter, a bright-eyed boy with curly black hair, dressed in a simple navy polo shirt and jeans. To anyone passing by, he looked like an ordinary kid, but Ethan was anything but ordinary. He was the son of Nathan Carter, a tech billionaire who had built StreamSphere, a streaming platform worth billions. Ethan clutched a first-class ticket in his hand, a reward from his father for winning a national math competition. "It's not money that defines you, Ethan. It's what you do with your opportunities," Nathan often said, and Ethan took those words to heart. He stood tall, scanning the massive departure board with the curiosity of a budding engineer. His small backpack held a book on artificial intelligence, a sketchpad, and wireless earbuds. Beside him, Sarah Mitchell, his nanny of 2 years, checked her phone with a furrowed brow. "Your dad just texted. He's stuck in traffic but swears he'll make it before boarding closes," she said, ruffling Ethan's hair. "You remember what we packed for the flight, right?" Ethan nodded confidently. "My AI book, sketchpad, earbuds, and spill-proof orange juice." He flashed a grin, revealing a slightly crooked front tooth, and Sarah chuckled. This wasn't Ethan's first flight to Los Angeles, but he always found the experience thrilling. Sarah led him toward the first-class lounge, where soft lighting and leather armchairs created an oasis of calm. They settled into seats near a floor-to-ceiling window, and Ethan opened his book, occasionally glancing at planes taxiing outside. Across the lounge, Emily Thompson strode in with the air of someone who expected the world to bend to her will. A senior executive at Horizon Media, a rival to StreamSphere, Emily wore a tailored gray blazer and skirt, her blonde hair pulled into a severe bun. She dragged a designer suitcase, her sharp eyes scanning the room. When they landed on Ethan, the only child in this exclusive space, her lips pursed as if she'd bitten into something sour. Emily wasn't used to inconvenience, and a kid in her carefully curated environment felt like a personal affront. She marched to the check-in desk, her voice cutting through the quiet. "Is that boy really allowed in here? I thought first class was for a certain caliber of traveler." The attendant, a young woman named Rachel, offered a polite smile. "Yes, ma'am. He has a valid first-class ticket." Emily's eyebrows shot up, her disbelief palpable. "Seriously? A child? I paid thousands to avoid this kind of thing." Rachel's smile held firm, though her eyes flickered with irritation. "I assure you, everything is in order, ma'am." Emily muttered, loud enough for Ethan to hear. "First class isn't what it used to be." Ethan kept his eyes on his book, but his fingers tightened around the pages. He'd encountered looks like Emily's before, people who sized him up and decided he didn't belong. Nathan had taught him that some folks carried prejudice in their hearts, and the best response was to stay true to himself. Ethan took a deep breath, focusing on a paragraph about neural networks. Suddenly, Sarah's phone buzzed. She read the message, her face paling. "Ethan, I'm so sorry, but my mom just fell at home. I need to get to the hospital." Ethan looked up, concern creasing his forehead. "Is she okay?" Sarah shook her head, uncertain. "I hope so, but I have to go now. Your dad's almost here. Can you manage alone for a bit?" Ethan squared his shoulders, his voice steady. "I'll be fine, Sarah. I've flown with Dad tons of times." After a moment's hesitation and a quick call to Nathan confirming he was en route, Sarah hugged Ethan tightly and hurried out, leaving him alone in the lounge. Ethan sat quietly, his book open on his lap, but Emily's gaze from across the room made his skin prickle. She sipped a coffee, her eyes narrowing as if his presence offended her sense of order. Ethan tried to ignore her, watching planes through the window, imagining the flight ahead. He texted his dad, "I'm in the lounge. You close?" The reply came quickly, "Doing my best, buddy. Traffic's a nightmare. Board without me and save my seat. Love you." When the boarding announcement for their Los Angeles flight echoed through the lounge, Ethan stood, adjusted his backpack, and headed to the gate. Unfortunately, he ended up directly behind Emily in the priority line. She glanced back, her eyes sweeping over him with a dismissive scoff. The gate agent, a middle-aged man named Mike, smiled warmly at Ethan. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Carter. Enjoy your flight." Ethan returned a polite nod. "Thank you, sir." Emily's glare sharpened, as if Ethan's courtesy was an insult. Stepping into the first-class cabin, Ethan found his seat, 2A, a window spot perfect for watching the wing. He carefully stowed his backpack, buckled his seatbelt, and opened his book. The cabin's soft lighting and plush seats felt like a treat, but the comfort didn't last. Emily stopped beside his row, checking her boarding pass, her face twisting when she realized she was assigned 2B, right next to Ethan. She flagged down a flight attendant, her tone icy. "There's a mistake with my seat. I didn't pay for this to sit next to a kid." The attendant, a woman named Lisa, responded, with practiced calm, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the flight is fully booked. This is your assigned seat." Emily huffed, shoving her bag into the overhead bin with unnecessary force. She dropped into her seat, angling her body away from Ethan as if he might contaminate her pristine world. Ethan sensed her hostility, but kept his gaze on the window, hoping his dad would arrive soon to make everything feel right again. Ethan Carter sat quietly in the first-class lounge at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, his book on artificial intelligence open, but unread. The weight of Emily Thompson's stare from across the room pressed against him like a physical force. She lounged in a leather armchair, her designer heels crossed at the ankles, scrolling through her phone with deliberate disdain. Every few seconds, her eyes flicked toward Ethan, narrowing as if his presence in this polished sanctuary was a personal offense. Ethan, only 9 years old, had learned to recognize that look. His father, Nathan Carter, had explained it as the kind of judgment some people cast without thinking, rooted in assumptions they didn't question. Still, it stung. Trying to shake off the discomfort, Ethan turned a page, focusing on a diagram of neural networks. He imagined explaining it to his dad later, how machines could learn like humans. The thought of Nathan, stuck in Seattle's notorious traffic, made Ethan glance at his phone. No new messages. He typed another. "Boarding soon. Hope you're close." He hit send, hoping his father's familiar grin would appear at the lounge entrance any minute. Meanwhile, Emily stood and approached the lounge's coffee bar, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. She leaned toward the barista, a young man named Tyler, and spoke in a stage whisper. "Do they let just anyone into first class these days? That kid over there doesn't exactly fit the vibe." Tyler glanced at Ethan, who was engrossed in his book, and shrugged. "He's got a ticket, ma'am. That's all that matters." Emily's smile was tight, humorless. "Standards are slipping. I'll be speaking to someone about this." She returned to her seat, her posture rigid, as if Ethan's existence was a problem she needed to solve. Ethan overheard her words, though he pretended not to. His stomach twisted, but he kept his face neutral, a skill he'd honed in moments like these, Nathan had taught him to respond to unkindness with dignity, not anger, and Ethan clung to that advice like a lifeline. He adjusted his glasses, a small pair that made him look studious, and forced himself to read another sentence. The lounge's elegance, the soft jazz, the clink of glasses, felt less inviting now, tainted by Emily's hostility. When the boarding call for Flight 247 to Los Angeles crackled over the speakers, Ethan gathered his backpack and stood, his small frame dwarfed by the sleek surroundings. He walked to the gate, his sneakers silent compared to the sharp tap of Emily's heels behind him. At the priority boarding line, fate placed him directly in front of her. He felt her eyes boring into the back of his neck, and when he handed his boarding pass to the gate agent, Mike, her sigh was audible. "Really? He's holding up the line now?" she muttered to no one in particular. Mike ignored her, giving Ethan a warm nod. "Have a great flight, young man." Ethan smiled faintly. "Thanks." The first-class cabin of the Boeing 737 welcomed Ethan with its spacious seats and polished wood accents. He slid into 2A, his window seat, and stowed his backpack carefully under the seat in front. Buckling his seatbelt, he opened his book again, comforted by the familiar routine. Outside, ground crews moved with practiced efficiency, and Ethan let himself imagine he was a pilot, charting the skies. The moment of peace shattered when Emily appeared beside his row, her boarding pass clutched like a weapon. She checked the seat number, then him, her expression souring as realization hit. She was stuck next to Ethan in 2B. "This can't be right," Emily snapped, waving down Lisa, the flight attendant who had greeted them earlier. "I paid for first class to have a certain experience, not to babysit." Lisa's smile remained steady, though her eyes tightened slightly. "I understand, ma'am, but the flight is fully booked. There are no other seats available in first class." Emily's jaw clenched. "What about business class? Anything would be better than this." She gestured vaguely toward Ethan, who stared at his book, his cheeks warming. Lisa shook her head. "I'm afraid every seat is taken. If you'd like, I can check for a later flight, but you'd need to deplane now." Emily glanced at her watch, her face flushing with frustration. "That's not an option. I have a pitch meeting tomorrow that could make or break my quarter." With a dramatic huff, she shoved her suitcase into the overhead bin, nearly clipping another passenger's shoulder. She dropped into 2B, pressing herself against the far armrest as if Ethan might somehow encroach on her space. The air between them crackled with tension, her perfume sharp and overpowering in the confined row. Ethan, raised to be polite no matter the circumstances, summoned his courage. He turned slightly toward her, offering a small smile. "Hi, I'm Ethan. Nice to meet you." His voice was clear, steady, and he extended a hand, just as his father had taught him. Emily stared at his hand like it was something unpleasant, her eyes traveling up to his face with undisguised contempt. A few nearby passengers glanced over, sensing the awkwardness. "Listen, kid," she said, her tone low and cutting. "I don't think you belong up here. People like you should stick to the back." The words hit Ethan like a slap, though he didn't flinch. His hand slowly dropped, and he turned back to the window, his throat tight. He'd heard comments like that before, but they never got easier to swallow. Across the aisle, an older woman with silver hair frowned, her lips parting as if she might say something, but she didn't. A man in a suit, one row ahead, turned briefly, then looked away. The cabin's silence felt heavy, complicit. Ethan focused on the ground crew outside, their orange vests bright against the tarmac, and told himself his dad would be here soon. Nathan always made things better, his calm presence like a shield. Emily, meanwhile, pulled out her phone and dialed a colleague, her voice carrying despite her attempt at discretion. Jessica, you won't believe who they stuck me next to in first class. A kid. Yeah, exactly the kind you'd expect. This is why I avoid flying commercial. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound, glancing at Ethan to ensure he heard. Ethan shrank slightly, in his seat, his fingers tracing the edge of his book. He wanted to disappear, to be anywhere but here, but he refused to let her see him crumble. Lisa, the flight attendant, passed by with a tray of pre-flight drinks. She leaned toward Ethan, her voice warm. "Orange juice for you, young man?" Ethan nodded, managing a quiet, "Yes, please." Emily cut in, not looking up from her phone. "Make sure he doesn't spill it. This blazer's worth more than most people's rent." Lisa's smile cooled, but she handed Ethan a spill-proof cup, her tone pointed. "I'm sure he'll be careful. He seems like a responsible kid." Emily rolled her eyes, oblivious to the rebuke, and popped in a pair of sleek earbuds, creating a barrier between herself and the boy she so clearly despised. As the final passengers boarded, Ethan's phone buzzed. A text from Nathan. "Almost there, buddy. Boarding last minute. See you soon." Ethan's shoulders relaxed slightly, a flicker of hope easing the knot in his chest. His dad was coming, and everything would be okay. He just had to hold on a little longer, even as Emily's hostility hung over him like a storm cloud waiting to burst. The first-class cabin of Flight 247 to Los Angeles hummed with the low drone of engines as the plane taxied toward the runway. Ethan Carter, seated in 2A, kept his eyes fixed on the window, where the Seattle tarmac slid past in a blur of gray and orange. His book on artificial intelligence lay open on his lap, but the words swam unreadably before him. The sting of Emily Thompson's earlier words, "People like you should stick to the back," lingered like a bruise. At 9 years old, Ethan had faced unkindness before, but the raw edge of her contempt cut deeper than usual. He clutched the armrest, willing himself to stay composed, repeating his father's advice in his mind. "Dignity is your strength, Ethan. Don't let anyone take it." Beside him in 2B, Emily sat with her arms crossed, her posture a fortress of irritation. She scrolled through emails on her phone, her manicured nails tapping the screen with sharp, impatient clicks. Every so often, she shot a glance at Ethan, her lips curling as if his mere existence was an affront to her carefully curated world. The cabin's soft lighting glinted off her gold watch, a stark contrast to the tension radiating from her. Ethan tried to make himself smaller, tucking his elbows in, careful not to encroach on the shared armrest. He just needed to survive until his dad, Nathan Carter, arrived. Unbeknownst to either of them, Nathan had made it onto the flight at the last possible moment. A traffic jam on I-5 had nearly derailed his plans, but a combination of charm and his recognizable name had convinced the gate crew to hold the door. Now seated in 3A, directly behind Ethan, Nathan adjusted his noise-canceling headphones and opened his tablet to catch up on work. His tailored navy suit was slightly rumpled from the rush, but his presence carried the quiet authority of a man who built empires. He hadn't yet noticed the tension in his son's row, distracted by an urgent email from Streamsphere's board. For now, the drama unfolding inches away went undetected. As the plane climbed to cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign blinked off, and flight attendants began their service. Lisa, the attendant who had shown Ethan kindness earlier, approached with a tray. "Another orange juice, Ethan?" she asked, her smile genuine. Ethan nodded, his voice soft. "Yes, please. Thank you." Lisa handed him a spill-proof cup, then turned to Emily, who ordered a sparkling water with a curt, "In a real glass, not plastic." Lisa complied, her professionalism unwavering, though her eyes lingered on Ethan with a hint of concern. Ethan placed his juice on the tray table, double-checking its stability. He opened his sketch pad, doodling a futuristic cityscape to distract himself from Emily's palpable disdain. For a brief moment, the cabin felt almost peaceful. Passengers sipped drinks, murmured conversations, and flipped through magazines. Then, without warning, the plane hit a pocket of turbulence. The cabin lurched, a sharp dip that sent gasps rippling through the rows. Ethan's juice cup wobbled, and despite his quick grab, it tipped. Most of the liquid splashed onto his tray and jeans, but a few stray drops speckled the sleeve of Emily's pristine blazer. Ethan's heart sank. He snatched a napkin, holding it out to her, his voice earnest. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. It was the turbulence. Please, use this." His wide eyes searched her face, hoping for understanding. It was a minor accident, the kind that happened on flights every day, easily brushed off with a laugh or a shrug. But Emily wasn't the forgiving type. Her gaze locked onto the tiny orange stains, her face contorting as if Ethan had thrown acid on her. She yanked the napkin from his hand, dabbing furiously at her sleeve, her voice rising to a shriek that silenced the cabin. "This is a $3,000 blazer!" she bellowed, heads turning from every direction. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Kids like you don't belong here. Ruining things for people who actually matter." The phrase "kids like you" hung in the air, heavy with implication, its prejudice unmistakable. Ethan froze, his napkin still clutched in one hand, his cheeks burning under the weight of every stare. "I said I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice trembling but steady. "It was an accident." "Sorry doesn't cut it," Emily snapped, leaning toward him, her eyes blazing. Across the aisle, the silver-haired woman from earlier gasped audibly, her hand flying to her chest. A businessman 2 rows ahead craned his neck, frowning. Ethan's heart pounded, but he refused to cry, though his vision blurred at the edges. He looked down at his sketch pad, where the turbulence had smudged his drawing, a small ruin mirroring the moment. Then, in a flash of unchecked rage, Emily did the unthinkable. Her hand shot out, striking Ethan across the cheek with a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot. The cabin fell deathly silent, every breath held. Ethan's head jerked to the side, his glasses slipping slightly. A red mark bloomed on his cheek, and a single tear escaped, tracing a slow path down his face. He didn't cry out, didn't move, his small body rigid with shock. "Maybe that'll teach you to respect your betters," Emily hissed, her voice venomous, as if she believed the act was justified. Gasps erupted around them. "She hit him," a woman whispered, horrified. "Did you see that?" a man muttered, half standing. A young passenger in 4B, a college student named Mia, had her phone out, recording since Emily's outburst began. The video captured everything: the spilled juice, Emily's tirade, and the slap that would soon define her downfall. Lisa, alerted by the commotion, hurried toward the row, her face a mask of alarm. In seat 3A, Nathan Carter slowly removed his headphones, his movements deliberate, almost too calm. He'd heard the tail end of Emily's rant, the ugly words "kids like you," and then the unmistakable sound of her hand meeting his son's face. His tablet slid into the seat beside him, forgotten, as he processed what he'd just witnessed. His jaw tightened, his dark eyes narrowing with a fury so controlled it was chilling. He stood, all 6 feet of him radiating a quiet intensity, and stepped into the aisle, beside row 2. Ethan, still clutching his cheek, looked up and saw his father. Relief flooded his features, softening the pain in his eyes. "Dad," he whispered, the word carrying a world of trust. Emily, oblivious to the shift in the cabin's atmosphere, dabbed at her sleeve, muttering about her ruined blazer. Then she sensed a presence and turned, her irritation ready to flare at this new interruption. Her eyes met Nathan's, and recognition hit like a freight train. The color drained from her face as she realized who stood before her. Nathan Carter, tech titan, father of the boy she'd just struck, and a man whose influence could move mountains. Nathan's voice, when he spoke, was low and precise, each word a blade. "You laid a hand on my son." The sentence hung in the air, a promise of consequences Emily couldn't yet fathom. The cabin watched, breathless, as the storm she'd unleashed began to break over her. The silence in the first-class cabin was deafening, the echo of Emily Thompson's slap against Ethan Carter's cheek lingering like a ghost. The air felt charged, every passenger frozen, eyes darting between the stunned 9-year-old, the furious woman in 2B, and the towering figure of Nathan Carter standing in the aisle. Ethan's small hand pressed against his reddened cheek, the single tear he'd let slip now dry, his glasses slightly askew. He looked up at his father, relief softening the fear in his eyes, though his posture remained guarded, as if bracing for more. Emily, oblivious to the seismic shift around her, straightened in her seat, dabbing at her blazer's sleeve with a napkin, muttering about the cost of dry cleaning. Her self-righteous indignation blinded her to the storm she'd unleashed. Nathan Carter's words cut through the tension, low and deliberate, each syllable heavy with restrained fury. "You laid a hand on my son." The simplicity of the statement belied its power, a declaration that shifted the cabin's atmosphere from shock to reckoning. Emily's head snapped toward him, her irritation flaring at the interruption, until she recognized him. Nathan Carter wasn't just any father. His face graced magazine covers, his tech empire, Streamsphere, reshaped how America consumed media, and his influence reached far beyond the confines of this plane. The realization hit Emily like a cold wave, her confidence crumbling as her eyes widened, her lips parting in a silent gasp. "Mr. Carter," she stammered, her voice stripped of its earlier venom. "This is a misunderstanding. I didn't know he was your son." Nathan's expression didn't soften. He knelt beside Ethan, his large hand gently tilting his son's face to inspect the red mark blooming across his cheek. "Are you okay, buddy?" he asked, his tone tender. "Meant only for Ethan." The boy nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm fine, Dad," but the quiver in his words betrayed the effort it took to hold himself together. Nathan's thumb brushed Ethan's cheek, wiping away the trace of that tear, his jaw tightening as he stood again. "I heard everything," Nathan said, his gaze locking onto Emily. "I heard you tell my son he doesn't belong in first class. I heard you say people like him should stay in the back. And I saw you strike him because of a few drops of juice." Each accusation landed like a gavel, precise and unyielding. Emily's face paled further, her hands trembling as she gripped the armrest. "That's not what happened," she protested weakly. "He was disruptive, clumsy. I just reacted." Her voice faltered under the weight of Nathan's stare, which held the calm intensity of a man who'd dismantled corporate giants without raising his voice. Passengers began to stir, their silence breaking into murmurs of agreement. The silver-haired woman across the aisle, whose name tag read Margaret, spoke first, her voice firm despite her age. "I saw it all. She's been awful to that boy since we boarded. Called him names, made him feel small, then hit him over nothing." The businessman 2 rows ahead, a man in his 50s named Richard, nodded. "It was uncalled for," he apologized, and she lost it. "Disgraceful." Mia, The college student in 4B held up her phone, her voice steady. I recorded the whole thing. Started when she yelled about her blazer. I've got the slap clear as day. Lisa, the flight attendant, reached the row, flanked by a colleague named David, whose name tag gleamed under the cabin lights. "Sir, ma'am, we need to address this immediately," Lisa said, her eyes flicking to Ethan with concern. Nathan stood straighter, his presence commanding. "I'd like to speak to the air marshal. This woman assaulted my son, and I intend to press charges." The words "press charges" hit Emily like a physical blow. She lurched forward in her seat, desperation creeping into her voice. "No, wait, you can't mean that. It was barely a touch. He ruined my blazer." David, the second attendant, stepped in, his tone professional but firm. "Ma'am, striking a passenger, especially a minor, is a serious matter. We've alerted the captain and the air marshal will be here shortly." Emily's breathing quickened, her eyes darting around the cabin, seeking an ally and finding none. Faces that had once been neutral now stared back with judgment, their whispers growing louder. "She hit a kid," someone said. "Over juice? Unbelievable," another added. Mia's fingers flew across her phone, already uploading the video to social media, with a caption, "Woman slaps boy in first class, doesn't know his dad's a billionaire." Nathan turned to Ethan, his voice softening again. "Son, has she been treating you like this the whole time?" Ethan hesitated, his innate kindness warring with the truth. He glanced at Emily, then back at his father, his shoulders hunching slightly. "It's okay to say it," Nathan encouraged. "You're not the one in trouble here." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, Dad. Since we got on, she kept saying I shouldn't be here, but I didn't want to make a scene." His honesty, delivered with such quiet dignity, seemed to pierce the cabin's heart. Margaret dabbed her eyes with a tissue, and Richard shook his head, muttering, "Poor kid." The air marshal, a broad-shouldered man in plain clothes named Greg, arrived, his badge discreetly tucked into his jacket. "I understand there's been an incident," he said, assessing the scene. Nathan met his gaze evenly. "This woman struck my son across the face. There are witnesses, and there's video evidence. I want her arrested when we land." Greg nodded, turning to Emily. "Ma'am, I'll need you to stay seated and cooperate. We'll sort this out on the ground." Emily's voice rose, panicked. "Arrested? This will ruin me. I have a pitch tomorrow that could save my company." Greg's expression remained impassive. "You should have thought of that before raising your hand." Mia stepped forward, her phone ready. "I've got the video. I can send it to you now." Greg nodded. "Appreciate it. Keep it safe. It'll be evidence." Emily's eyes widened as the reality sank in. Her career, her reputation, her carefully constructed life, all teetering on the edge because of a moment's rage. She tried one last plea, turning to Nathan. "Mr. Carter, please, I didn't mean it. Can't we settle this privately?" Nathan's response was cold, final. "The time for that ended when you touched my son. You made your choice. Now face it." David, the flight attendant, spoke up. "Ma'am, we're moving you to another seat for the rest of the flight. Mr. Carter, we can rearrange things to make you and your son more comfortable." Nathan nodded. "Thank you. Ethan's been through enough." Emily gathered her things with shaking hands, her designer bag suddenly seeming like a hollow prop. As David escorted her to a seat in the last row of business class, a public demotion that felt poetic, passengers watched in silence, their phones already buzzing with texts and posts about the incident. Nathan slid into 2B, pulling Ethan close. "You did good, kid. he murmured, his arm around his son's shoulders. I'm proud of you for staying strong. Ethan leaned against him, the weight of the ordeal easing in his father's presence. Thanks, Dad, he whispered, managing a small smile. Outside, the clouds stretched endlessly, a reminder of the world beyond this cabin, where Emily's actions were already rippling outward, her fate sealed by the truth she couldn't escape. The descent into Los Angeles International Airport was smooth, the plane gliding through a golden California sunset, but the atmosphere in the cabin of Flight 247 remained electric. Ethan Carter sat beside his father, Nathan Carter, in the first-class row that had been the stage for an unforgettable drama. The red mark on Ethan's cheek had faded to a faint pink, but the memory of Emily Thompson's slap lingered in his eyes, a mix of relief and quiet strength. Nathan kept a protective arm around his son, his tablet untouched since the confrontation. Across the cabin, passengers stole glances at them, their whispers now laced with admiration for the boy who'd faced cruelty with grace. Emily sat alone in her reassigned seat in business class, her designer blazer crumpled, her phone vibrating relentlessly against the tray table. She stared at the screen, notifications piling up, texts from colleagues, alerts from social media, an email from her boss, marked urgent. The video of her slapping Ethan, uploaded by Mia, the college student, had exploded online, racking up thousands of shares within an hour. The caption, "Woman slaps boy in first class, doesn't know his dad's a billionaire," had ignited a firestorm. Hashtags like "Justice for Ethan" and "First Class Fail" trending across platforms. Emily's fingers hovered over a message from her CEO. "Call me immediately. This is a disaster." Her stomach churned, the weight of her actions sinking in like a stone. As the plane approached the gate, the captain's voice broke through the intercom, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated upon arrival. Authorities will board to handle a matter, and we appreciate your cooperation." The announcement confirmed what everyone already knew. Emily's reckoning was imminent. Ethan glanced at his dad, his voice small. "Is she going to jail?" Nathan squeezed his shoulder gently. "She'll face what she did, Ethan. That's how it works when you hurt someone." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful, a flicker of sadness mingling with his relief. Even after everything, his heart held space for empathy. When the cabin door opened, 3 police officers stepped aboard, their badges glinting under the overhead lights. The lead officer, a woman named Carla, conferred briefly with Lisa, the flight attendant, before approaching Emily's row. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," Carla said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Emily's hand shook as she gathered her bag, her face ashen. She stood, avoiding the stares of passengers, who now saw her not as a powerful executive, but as someone who'd crossed an unforgivable line. As she walked down the aisle, her heels silent on the carpet, she passed Ethan and Nathan. For a moment her eyes met Nathan's, searching for a shred of mercy, but his gaze was unyielding, a wall of resolve. Ethan looked away, focusing on his sketchpad, where he'd begun redrawing his smudged cityscape. The officers escorted Emily off the plane, disappearing into the jetway as passengers began murmuring again, some pulling out phones to share updates. Nathan leaned toward Ethan, his voice low. "You don't have to feel bad for her, son. She chose her path." Ethan nodded slowly. "I just wish people wouldn't be so mean. It doesn't make anything better." Nathan's chest tightened at his son's wisdom, far beyond his 9 years. "You're right, and that's why we keep doing better, no matter what." 20 minutes later, as Nathan and Ethan deplaned, they were met by a surprising sight. A cluster of local reporters waiting at the gate, cameras flashing. The video's viral spread had drawn media attention, and Nathan shielded Ethan from the onslaught, his arm a steady barrier. "Mr. Carter, is it true your son was assaulted?" one reporter called. "Will you press charges?" another shouted. Nathan paused, his voice measured but resonant. "My son was attacked by a passenger who targeted him with hateful words and actions. We're working with authorities and ask for privacy while Ethan processes this. Thank you." He guided Ethan through the terminal, ignoring further questions, the boy's small hand secure in his. In the weeks that followed, the incident became a national touchstone. News outlets ran segments dissecting the video, now viewed millions of times, sparking debates about prejudice, privilege, and accountability. Emily Thompson faced formal charges of assault on a minor, with a hate crime enhancement due to her recorded remarks. Horizon Media, her employer, issued a statement condemning her actions and announced her termination. Behind closed doors, industry rumors swirled that Nathan Streamsphere was eyeing a strategic partnership with Horizon's biggest client, a move that would cripple the company. Whether true or not, the timing felt like poetic justice. Emily's life unraveled with brutal speed. Her sleek downtown apartment went up for rent, replaced by a modest studio in a less glamorous neighborhood. Her social circle, once a web of power players, dissolved as invitations dried up and calls went unanswered. Legal fees piled high, and her name became synonymous with a cautionary tale. One evening, sitting alone in her new apartment, she scrolled through comments on the video. Words like disgrace and monster, cutting deeper than she'd expected. For the first time, she wondered if her anger had been worth it, but the answer was too late to matter. Meanwhile, Ethan found his voice in unexpected ways. A month after the flight, he stood at a community center in Los Angeles, addressing a youth group focused on inclusion. His glasses glinted under the stage lights as he spoke, his voice steady despite the crowd. "When it happened, I was scared," he admitted, his hands clasped tightly. "But my dad says how people treat you shows who they are, not who you are. Nobody can make you less than you are, unless you let them." The room erupted in applause, kids and teens nodding, many having seen the video that inspired Ethan's speech. Nathan, watching from the back, felt a swell of pride, knowing his son was turning pain into purpose. Nathan, too, channeled the incident into change. He launched the Carter Foundation for Equity, a nonprofit aimed at fostering inclusivity in corporate spaces, starting with tech and media. At its inaugural gala, attended by industry leaders, he spoke candidly. "Luxury isn't about who you exclude, it's about lifting everyone up. No one should feel they don't belong because of how they look or where they come from." The initiative funded scholarships, training programs, and audits to root out bias, earning Nathan praise as a visionary with a conscience. 6 months later, Ethan and Nathan boarded another first-class flight, this time to New York. As they settled into their seats, a flight attendant named Claire approached, her smile warm. "Mr. Carter, Ethan, it's an honor to have you with us. Anything you need." Ethan grinned, his crooked tooth charming as ever. "Orange juice, please. In a cup with a lid, just in case." Claire laughed, and Nathan chuckled, exchanging a knowing glance with his son. The joke, small but significant, showed Ethan's healing, his ability to find humor in a once painful memory. As the plane took off, Ethan looked out the window, the skyline fading into clouds. The incident with Emily was a scar, but one that had taught him strength, not shame. Nathan had turned a moment of ugliness into a movement, and Ethan had discovered a courage he hadn't known he possessed. Emily's attempt to diminish him had failed, revealing instead his place in the world, anywhere his heart and mind could carry him. The sky stretched ahead, vast and full of promise, a fitting end to a journey that began with a slap and ended with a lesson no one would forget.